I knew she was going to open my mailbox again. I just didn't expect her to do it while I was still holding my morning coffee. The metallic click came first, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet like it didn't belong in this neighborhood of trimmed hedges and matching mailboxes. I froze halfway down my driveway, the heat from the cup warming my palm, the smell of dark roast mixing with that faint plastic scent of sun-warmed mailbox paint. 6:12 a.m. I remember the time because everything about that moment felt too precise to be random. Her hand slid in like it had done this 100 times before. No hesitation, no glance around, just confidence. Brenda Whitmore, HOA president, standing in front of my house like she owned more than just her corner lot. She pulled out a small stack of envelopes, flipped through them with a casual flick of her wrist, and paused. That was new. Her fingers stopped on a single envelope, thicker than the rest, stamped with a dark blue federal seal that caught the morning light just enough to make it glow. I didn't move, didn't say a word, because the last 3 times I had, she'd smiled that tight, practiced smile and told me she was protecting community standards. The first time, she claimed she was checking for misdelivered mail. The second time, she said my mailbox was technically visible from the street outside approved hours. The third time, she didn't even bother with an excuse. Just looked at me like I was the one out of line. And every time, something was missing afterward. Bills that showed up late. A notice that never arrived. A check I had to cancel after it mysteriously vanished. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. And Brenda? She was very, very comfortable with it. That's what people like her count on. The idea that nobody wants to make a federal case out of something as small as a mailbox. She slid that envelope out slowly, almost savoring it, and tucked it into her folder like it belonged there. The kind of folder HOA presidents carry when they want to look official. Clipboard energy without the clipboard. The air felt still. Even the birds had gone quiet, like they were waiting to see what I'd do. I took a slow sip of my coffee instead. Bitter. Strong. Exactly how I liked it. Because here's the thing Brenda didn't know. This wasn't the third time. It wasn't even the fifth. And that envelope she just took? That wasn't just mail. It was the last piece I needed. I turned back toward my house without a word, gravel crunching under my boots, every step measured. Inside, my phone was already on the counter where I'd left it, screen dark, waiting. I tapped it once, and the recording pulled up instantly. Clear angle, clean shot, her hand, the envelope, everything. Timestamped. Filed. Ready. My thumb hovered for half a second before pressing call. The line rang once. Twice. Then a calm voice picked up on the other end. "This is Cole," I said, keeping my voice level, steady, like I'd rehearsed it 100 times. "Yeah, it's happening again. I have always believed you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat things that are not theirs, and Brenda Whitmore treated my mailbox like it was just another extension of her authority, something to inspect, manage, and quietly control. Willowbrook Estates looked perfect on paper when I bought the place 6 months ago, the kind of neighborhood where every lawn sat exactly 2.5 inches tall, and every house wore the same neutral shades like a uniform. But the silence here was not peaceful. It was curated, maintained, enforced. The first week I moved in, I noticed how people lowered their voices when they said her name, like it carried weight, like it could echo back to her if they said it too loud. She had been HOA president for 4 years, long enough to turn guidelines into leverage and policies into pressure. I met her on day 3, standing at the edge of my driveway with a clipboard tucked under her arm, the faint smell of expensive perfume cutting through the warm Texas air. She smiled before I even said a word, that kind of smile that looks friendly until you notice it never reaches the eyes. "Welcome to the community, Ethan," she said, stretching my name just a second too long, like she was testing how it felt in her mouth. She pointed out things I had not even noticed yet, the angle of my trash bin, the color tone of my porch light, the exact placement of my mailbox. That mailbox became her favorite topic. "It is slightly forward of regulation alignment," she told me, tapping the side of it with her pen like she was marking territory. I remember the hollow sound it made, plastic against metal, echoing just enough to feel off. I adjusted it the next morning, half an inch back, just to avoid the conversation. It did not matter. The notices started anyway. First, it was a warning about visibility from the street, then a note about proper labeling, then a reminder that mailboxes were considered part of the visual identity of the neighborhood. Every piece of paper she sent felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just ink. And then the mail itself started disappearing. At first I thought it was a delivery issue, a missed scan, a late route, something normal, something explainable. But then I began to notice the pattern. Anything important vanished. Anything official arrived late or already opened. Envelopes showed up with the edges just slightly bent, like someone had tested them before deciding to leave them behind. I started checking the box twice a day, once in the morning, once at night, the way you check a lock when something does not feel right. The hinge began to squeak from overuse, a thin, high-pitched sound that stuck in my head long after I walked away. One afternoon I caught her standing near it, not touching it yet, just standing there like she was waiting for something. When she saw me, she did not step back, did not apologize. She just nodded, like we both understood the rules of a game nobody had explained out loud. That was the moment I stopped assuming this was random. That was the moment I started paying attention. Because people like Brenda do not act without reason, and they definitely do not repeat a mistake unless they believe nobody is capable of stopping them. By the second week, I stopped reacting and started measuring. Time, movement, patterns, all of it. There is a rhythm to a neighborhood like Willowbrook if you pay close enough attention. Sprinklers hiss at exactly 5:45 in the morning, garage doors roll open and staggered. Intervals between 7 and 8, and Brenda Whitmore makes her first round just after 6, always with that same folder tucked under her arm like it gives her authority a physical form. I began timing her without making it obvious, standing just inside my front window with the blinds barely tilted, watching the reflection more than the street itself. It was subtle, the way she approached the mailbox, never directly at first. She would slow down as she passed, glance once, then double back like she had forgotten something. That was her tell. That was the moment she decided whether it was worth it. And most days it was. I started logging everything. Not in a way anyone would notice, just small notes on my phone, timestamps, descriptions, nothing dramatic. 6:12, hand in mailbox. 6:13, envelope removed. 6:14, she walks away without looking back. Over and over again until the pattern stopped being a suspicion and became a certainty. What made it worse was how comfortable she had become. The hesitation was gone. The quick glances over her shoulder disappeared. She started opening the box fully, letting it creak on its hinge like it belonged to her. That sound followed me everywhere. That dry metallic groan that meant something was wrong and nobody else seemed to hear it. One afternoon, I tested it. I left an envelope on top of the stack, nothing important, just a blank document folded inside with my name typed neatly on the front. Something easy to recognize. I watched from the side window as she approached. Same routine, same pause, same decision. She opened the box, flipped through the mail, and stopped exactly where I knew she would. The envelope never made it back into the pile. She did not even bother pretending that time. She slid it into her folder and kept walking, like she had just picked up something that belonged to her all along. I waited until she was out of sight before stepping outside, the air already warming under the early sun, the faint smell of cut grass drifting from somewhere down the block. The mailbox door swung open with that same hollow sound, lighter now, emptier. That was when it clicked for me. This was not about curiosity. It was not about control in the way I first thought. This was about information. She was reading ahead, knowing things before she was supposed to, using that knowledge to stay one step ahead of everyone else in this neighborhood. The violation notices that arrived just after deadlines, the reminders that referenced letters I had not even opened yet, the way she always seemed prepared for conversations before they happened. It all lined up too clean to ignore. I closed the mailbox slowly, letting the latch settle into place with a soft snap, and for the first time, I did not feel frustrated. I felt focused. Because once you understand why someone is doing something, you can predict what they will do next. And Brenda Whitmore, for all her confidence, had just made herself completely predictable. Once I understood the pattern, the neighborhood started to sound different. The quiet was no longer peaceful, it was calculated. The hum of distant lawn equipment, the soft thud of car doors closing, the rhythmic tick of sprinklers sweeping across identical patches of grass, all of it felt like background noise to something much more deliberate happening right in front of me. Brenda was not improvising. She was operating on routine, and routines can be studied. I began adjusting mine without making it obvious. I left the house at slightly different times, returned earlier than expected, stayed inside when I normally would have stepped out. not to catch her, but to confirm that she did not care about being seen. That was the real shift. The more comfortable she became, the more careless she looked, but it was not carelessness. It was confidence built on repetition. She believed nobody would challenge her because nobody had. One evening, just before sunset, I stepped outside to check the mailbox earlier than usual. The sky was turning that muted orange that settles over Texas neighborhoods like a filter, and the air carried that dry, warm smell of pavement cooling after a long day. The mailbox was already open. Not wide, just enough to tell me it had been touched recently. Inside, the stack was thinner than it should have been. Again, I did not need to count. I could feel it. That same hollow space where something should have been. I closed it slowly, letting the latch click into place, and turned toward the street. Brenda was standing 2 houses down, talking to a neighbor, her posture relaxed, her voice carrying just enough to sound friendly without revealing anything real. She did not look over. She did not need to. She already knew what she had taken. The next morning, I changed one more variable. I installed a camera. Not obvious, not pointed directly at the mailbox, just a small lens tucked into the corner of the porch frame, angled to capture movement without announcing itself. The setup took less than 10 minutes, but I took my time, adjusting the angle, checking the feed, making sure the timestamp was clear and accurate. Details matter when you plan to rely on them later. The first recording came in at exactly 6:12 the following morning. Same time, same approach, same pause. Watching it back felt different than seeing it in real time. There was no distraction, no emotion, just sequence. She walked up, opened the mailbox, sorted through the contents, and removed 2 envelopes. One went into her folder. The other she held for a second longer, scanning the front before slipping it in as well. Then she closed the box, not gently, but with enough force to make that familiar metallic sound echo just slightly. It was clean, clear, undeniable. I replayed it twice, not because I needed to confirm what I saw, but because I needed to understand how consistent she was. And she was perfect. Every movement identical to the last. Every action predictable down to the second. That was when the plan stopped being an idea and became a process. Because predictability is not just a weakness, it is an invitation. And Brenda Whitmore had just made it very clear that she would take anything that looked important enough. All I had to do was decide what to let her take next. I did not rush the next step because rushing is how people make mistakes, and mistakes are the only thing Brenda Whitmore had not made yet. Everything she did was controlled, deliberate, built on the assumption that nobody was paying close enough attention to. Challenge her. That assumption was the only leverage I needed. The camera stayed in place, recording every morning without fail, each clip lining up perfectly with the last like frames in a loop. 6:12 approach. 6:12 and 20 seconds, mailbox opens. 6:12 and 35 seconds, selection. 6:13, she walks away. I watched enough of those clips to know the exact moment her hand would pause, the slight tilt of her head when something caught her interest, the way her fingers pressed lightly against the envelope as if she could feel its importance through the paper. People like Brenda do not guess. They recognize patterns. They look for signals. Official stamps. Thick paper. Anything that looks like it carries weight. So I gave her exactly what she was looking for. I spent that afternoon at my kitchen counter, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet while I prepared the envelope. Nothing complicated, just precise. Standard size, slightly heavier stock, clean print, no return address on the front. The kind of envelope that does not belong in a stack of ordinary mail. The kind that makes someone stop and look twice. I slid it into the mailbox just before sunset, adjusting it so it would sit right on top, visible the moment the door opened. The air outside had that dry, cooling feel again, pavement releasing heat slowly as the sky dimmed into that familiar orange haze. Everything about the setup felt ordinary, and that was the point. No sudden changes. No obvious bait. Just one more piece added to a pattern she already trusted. That night, I checked the camera feed one last time before going to bed, making sure the angle was still clean, the timestamp sharp, the frame unobstructed. Details matter more when the outcome depends on them. Sleep came easy, not because I was relaxed, but because everything was already in motion. The next morning, I did not stand by the window. I did not need to. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the same bitter taste, the same warmth in my hands, listening. The neighborhood moved through its routine, sprinklers hissing, a car engine turning over somewhere down the block, a garage door rolling open with that low mechanical hum. And then it came. That metallic click. Sharp. Familiar. Exactly on time. I did not move. Seconds passed, measured, predictable. I could picture it without seeing it. The door opening. The stack shifting. Her hand moving straight to the top. That brief pause. That decision. By the time I stood up and walked to the counter, the notification was already there, waiting on my phone. Motion detected. I tapped it once, and the video loaded instantly. There she was, framed perfectly, repeating the same sequence she had followed every single day. Only this time her hand stopped longer than usual. The envelope caught her attention immediately. She turned it slightly, angling it toward the light, reading whatever she thought she could see from the outside. Then, without hesitation, she slid it into her folder. No glance around. No second thought. Just certainty. I watched the clip through to the end, letting the final seconds play out as she closed the mailbox and walked away, leaving everything else behind like it never mattered. The house was quiet again, but it did not feel empty. It felt complete, because at that moment, there was nothing left to guess. No missing piece. No uncertainty. Just a sequence that had played out exactly as expected. And for the first time since I moved into Willowbrook Estates, I was not reacting to what Brenda Whitmore was doing. I was directing it. The moment she took that envelope, everything shifted from observation to execution. I let the video finish playing, watching her walk out of frame with the same calm confidence she had carried every morning. But this time, there was something different about it. Finality. The kind that comes when a pattern reaches its end and becomes evidence. I set the phone down carefully, the screen still glowing faintly against the kitchen counter, and took another sip of my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, the bitterness sharper now, but I barely noticed. My focus had already moved forward. Because what Brenda Whitmore had just done was not a misunderstanding, and it was not a gray area. It was a line, clearly defined, and she had crossed it on camera, on record, and on repeat. I walked over to my desk, the hardwood floor creaking softly under each step, and opened the drawer where I had been keeping everything organized. Printouts, timestamps, notes, all aligned in a way that made sense without explanation. Every clip labeled, every incident documented. The envelope she had just taken was the final entry in a sequence that had been building for weeks. I picked up the folder and flipped through it slowly, not because I needed to review it, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it in my hands. Evidence has a way of grounding things. It turns frustration into structure. It turns suspicion into fact. And facts do not argue. They stand. I closed the folder and set it down next to my phone, then tapped the screen again, pulling up the contact I had called earlier that morning. No name saved. Just a number. The kind of number you do not use casually. I pressed it once more and held the phone to my ear, listening to the line connect. This time it picked up faster. Go ahead, the voice said, calm, direct, like they already knew why I was calling. I kept my tone steady, the same way I had practiced it in my head. I have another confirmed incident, I said. Clear video. Timestamped. Federal marked envelope removed from my mailbox. There was a brief pause on the other end, not hesitation, just processing. Understood, the voice replied. Maintain your current routine. Do not engage. We will handle the rest. I nodded slightly, even though they could not see me, and ended the call. The house felt quieter after that. Not empty, just settled, like something had finally locked into place. Outside, the neighborhood continued exactly as it always had. Cars passed by at a steady pace, a dog barked somewhere in the distance, a garage door opened and closed with that familiar mechanical rhythm. Nothing about Willowbrook Estates looked different. And that was the point. Situations like this do not announce themselves. They unfold quietly until the moment they cannot anymore. I walked back to the window, not to watch for her this time, but to take in the street as a whole. Clean driveways. Perfect lawns. Identical mailboxes lined up. Like they were part of a display. Mine sat there among them. Unchanged, closed, ordinary. You would never know just by looking at it that it had become the center of something much bigger than neighborhood rules or HOA authority. I rested my hand lightly against the glass, feeling the cool surface under my fingertips, and let out a slow breath. Brenda believed she was in control because she had never been challenged. She believed the system worked in her favor because nobody had ever used it against her. But systems are not loyal. They are precise. And precision, when applied correctly, does not leave room for interpretation. I stepped away from the window and picked up my coffee again, finishing what was left in one steady sip. The taste lingered, strong and familiar. Outside, everything looked the same. But I knew something she did not. The next knock on her door would not be from a neighbor. The rest of that day moved slower than usual, not because anything changed, but because I was no longer waiting for something to happen. It already had. Every sound in the house felt sharper, more defined, like the world had shifted into focus now that there was nothing left to question. I kept my routine exactly the same, just like they told me. No sudden movements. No confrontation. No acknowledgement. By late afternoon, the sunlight stretched long across the street, casting clean shadows along the identical rows of driveways and mailboxes. Brenda's house sat 3 doors down, quiet on the outside, blinds partially drawn, her white SUV parked perfectly centered in the driveway like it had been measured. Nothing about it suggested anything unusual. That was the part people never understand. The biggest mistakes rarely look like mistakes from the outside. Around 5:20, I stepped out onto my porch with an empty coffee mug in my hand, more out of habit than anything else. The air had cooled just enough to take the edge off the heat, carrying that faint scent of cut grass and distant pavement. A few neighbors were outside, going through their normal routines, watering plants, checking their own mailboxes, moving through the same controlled rhythm that defined this place. I nodded to one of them, a quiet acknowledgement, nothing more. No one suspected anything. No one ever does until it becomes impossible to ignore. I leaned against the porch railing, watching the street without focusing on any one thing in particular. Minutes passed. Then it happened. 2 vehicles turned into the neighborhood slowly, not speeding, not drawing attention, just moving with purpose. Dark-colored, clean, unmarked in the way that makes them stand out if you know what to look for. They did not stop right away. They drove past my house first, then continued down the street until they reached Brenda's driveway. Both vehicles pulled in one after the other, precise, controlled, no hesitation. The engines cut almost simultaneously, leaving a brief silence that felt heavier than it should have. I did not move. I did not need to. From where I stood, I had a clear view without being obvious, just another neighbor on his porch at the end of the day. The doors opened. 2 individuals stepped out, dressed plainly, no visible rush, no unnecessary movement. Everything about them was efficient. They walked up the driveway together, one slightly ahead of the other, their pace steady, their posture composed. There was no announcement, no raised voices, no scene. Just a quiet approach to a front door that had never expected this kind of attention. One of them knocked. Not loud, not aggressive, just firm enough to carry through the door. The sound echoed faintly across the street, a simple knock that somehow felt louder than anything else that had happened in this neighborhood. A few seconds passed. The door opened. I could not hear the words from where I stood, but I did not need to. I saw the shift immediately. Brenda's posture changed, her shoulders tightening, her expression losing that practiced control she carried so well. The folder was not in her hands this time. There was no smile, just confusion at first, then something else settling in as the conversation continued. One of the agents held up something, identification most likely, and that was when it became real for her. The distance between them did not change, but the balance of the situation did. I stayed where I was, silent, steady, watching the moment unfold without stepping into it. Because this was never about confrontation. It was about process. And process, once it starts, does not need help finishing. The street remained quiet, the same as always, but the atmosphere had shifted in a way you could feel without seeing. A single knock had done what weeks of control could not. And for the first time since I moved into this neighborhood, Brenda Whitmore was no longer the one setting the rules. From where I stood, the conversation at Brenda's door stretched longer than I expected, not chaotic, not loud, just controlled in a way that made it feel heavier with every passing second. One of the agents remained positioned slightly forward, speaking in a calm, measured tone, while the other stood just off to the side, observing everything without interruption. That detail stood out to me more than anything else. They were not there to argue. They were there to confirm. Brenda tried to respond at first. I could tell by the movement of her hands, the slight tilt of her head, the way she leaned forward like she was used to steering conversations back in her favor. But this was not a conversation she could manage. Her gestures slowed. Her posture shifted again, less certain this time, like she was recalibrating in real time and realizing there was no angle that worked. The street remained quiet, but it was no longer unnoticed. A neighbor across from her house paused mid-step, watering hose still running, the stream of water hitting the pavement in a steady, forgotten arc. Another door down the block opened just slightly, enough for someone to look out without stepping fully into view. The atmosphere had changed, not with noise, but with attention. People could feel something was happening, even if they did not understand what. I stayed exactly where I was, leaning against the railing, the wood warm under my forearm from the late afternoon sun. I did not need to get closer. Everything I needed was already in motion. One of the agents reached into a slim folder and removed a document, holding it out in a way that was clear, deliberate, leaving no room for interpretation. Brenda looked at it, then back at them, then at it again. That was the moment her confidence finally broke. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, visible fractures. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Her stance narrowed. The certainty she carried every morning when she opened my mailbox was gone, replaced with something quieter, something uncertain. She stepped back just enough to allow them space, and they moved forward past the threshold, not rushed, not forceful, just following procedure. The door remained open, but the balance of control had already shifted inside. Minutes passed. The vehicles stayed where they were, silent, unmarked, waiting. The neighborhood resumed its surface-level rhythm, but the undercurrent had changed. Conversations would happen later. Questions would be asked. But right now, everything remained suspended in that quiet awareness that something official had just cut through the illusion of control that had defined this place for so long. Eventually, the agents stepped back out, their movements just as measured as when they arrived. Brenda followed a step behind, her expression no longer composed, her eyes avoiding the street, avoiding the houses, avoiding anything that might reflect the situation back at her. There was no folder in her hands now, no clipboard, no sense of authority, just a person standing in her own doorway, realizing that the system she had used so comfortably did not belong to her. One of the agents spoke again, briefly, then nodded once before turning toward the driveway. They returned to their vehicles without delay, doors closing with that same controlled precision, engines starting in near unison. As they pulled away, the street returned to its usual quiet, but it did not feel the same. I remained on the porch for a moment longer, letting the stillness settle, feeling the shift without needing to see anything else. Because this was never about creating a scene. It was about letting the right process unfold at the right time. And now that it had, there was nothing left for Brenda Whitmore to control. The next morning felt different before I even stepped outside. Not louder, not brighter. Just settled. The kind of quiet that comes after something has already been decided. I walked to the front door with my usual routine, keys in one hand, coffee in the other, the faint aroma rising with the steam, steady and familiar. When I opened the door, the air hit me cool and clean, carrying none of the tension that had been sitting just beneath the surface for weeks. The mailbox stood exactly where it always had, aligned, untouched, ordinary. But for the first time since I moved in, it actually felt like it belonged to me. I walked down the driveway slowly, gravel crunching under my boots, each step deliberate, not because I was cautious, but because I no longer needed to rush. When I reached the box, I paused for just a second, fingers resting lightly on the edge before pulling it open. No metallic groan, no hollow echo, just a smooth, quiet motion. Inside, the mail sat undisturbed, every envelope exactly where it should be. Bills, advertisements, one official-looking document, still sealed, still mine. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding and closed the box with a soft click. Across the street, movement had already started. A neighbor stepped out to grab his paper, glancing once toward Brenda's house before quickly looking away. Another car pulled out of a driveway down the block, slower than usual, like the driver was thinking about something else. Nothing dramatic, just small changes. Subtle shifts in behavior that told you the story had already spread without a single word being spoken out loud. Brenda's house remained quiet, curtains drawn tighter than usual. No early morning walk, no clipboard, no slow, calculated pass by my driveway. The absence was noticeable because it broke the pattern she had built so carefully. And in places like this, patterns are everything. I turned back toward my house, the sun just beginning to rise higher, casting clean light across the identical lines of the neighborhood. Everything looked the same. Perfect lawns, clean sidewalks, matching mailboxes standing in a row like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Systems do not fail loudly. They correct quietly, one action at a time until balance is restored. Inside, I set my coffee down on the counter and picked up my phone, scrolling through the recordings one last time. Clip after clip, each one leading to the same conclusion. Clear, consistent, undeniable. I did not need to watch them again, but I did anyway, just to remind myself how easy it is for someone to believe they are untouchable when nobody challenges them. I locked the screen and set the phone down, the house silent around me, the kind of silence that no longer felt tense, just complete. Later that afternoon, a notice appeared on the community board near the entrance. Short, formal, the kind of language that says everything without explaining anything. Brenda Whitmore was stepping down from her position effective immediately. No details, no explanation, just a line that closed the loop she had spent years building. I read it once, then walked away without stopping. Because this was never about public scenes or loud victories. It was about letting the right system do what it was designed to do. I stepped back onto my porch as the day settled into its usual rhythm, the neighborhood returning to its carefully maintained calm. The mailbox stood at the end of my driveway, quiet, ordinary, exactly where it had always been. Only now, it meant something different. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness settle, and looked out across the street one last time. She thought it was just mail. Turns out, it was everything she needed to lose control.